guest today is Kristopher Rufty. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Kristopher, and how you got started in the horror genre.
Oh, wow. I guess I got started in horror back when I was 5. And my mom stuck me in front of the TV. She was canning. I don't know. For people who are listening might not know what I mean by that. She was canning tomatoes during the summer. And she stuck me in front of the TV thinking I was about to watch this superhero show. But what it was called Commander USA. And it was, he was like a movie show host. And he just so happened he was showing Friday the 13th. And I was 5 years old sitting on the living room floor. I did not move the entire time. And ended up watching part 1 and then begged my mom to let me watch part 2 the same day. And surprisingly, she did. And then I started drawing like horror pictures and pictures of people being slashed up, and my mom would hang them on the fridge.
That's brilliant. So didn't anybody ever feel worried about what you were drawing?
Oh yeah. My dad was one of them, but he was very laid back about it. He just kind of, I guess, said, until he starts showing signs of that we might need to worry, then I'll let him do it. And they did. I mean, I was really young. This was in the 80s, and I was like 5 years old and 6 years old, going to video stores and renting Friday the 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Return of the Living Dead, just Witchboard, all kinds of stuff. So I got hooked on it very early on. It really seems like it's been a part of me as far as I can remember.
Yeah. So is that what made you write horror as well?
Yeah, it is, because we were watching Evil Dead 2. And I was asking my dad, I said, who's the person that comes up with the ideas for this stuff? And he said, oh, that's the writer. And I was like, oh, okay. And then in school, I had a teacher that said, she's going to have us like write and illustrate our own story. And then she taught us how to make like our own book cover with cardboard, and there was like this paper that we glued to it, and we got to paint the cover and stuff. And that, we put that on the bookshelf, when I was a kid, and I would look over and see like my book, on the bookshelf. And I don't know, I guess combine those two together, and there was no doubt what I was going to end up trying to do.
So how do you come up with an idea?
Oh, well, they just kind of come randomly. They just will like pop in my head at random times. Like I have this book called Bigfoot Beach. This is a story that I like to tell. I went to eat lunch with my 2 older kids. My youngest hadn't been born yet. And this was when my 2 older 2 were still in elementary school. And, we're sitting there, we're eating together, just the 3 of us. And my oldest is telling me that his new shoes are already starting to feel tight. And I was like, your feet are just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And his sister was like, yeah, he's like Bigfoot. And I was like, yeah, if you leave like footprints in the sand at the beach or something, the people are like, there's a Bigfoot on the beach. And then like all 3 of us looked at each other, and I was like, oh, and there's like the whole idea just came in my head right there. I started writing that book that weekend, and ended up being a very popular release for me.
That's fantastic. So how do you create a compelling character? What's your process?
I don't know. I don't think I really have. Well, the most process I have, I guess, is like I'll sit down with any book, and before I get started, even short stories, anything that I'm going to write, and I used to do it by hand, like in a composition book or on legal pad. I would do this process, which was like kind of like making notes about it, but almost discussing the story. So it's kind of like talking to myself, but in written form, if that makes any sense. And but now I do it on, like on a computer, but sometimes I'll still do it handwritten, but then I'll just kind of, like have the basis of the idea or the premise, and I'll type out the premise, and then I'll go, okay, well, who would this affect? And then it would I'll go down the list, and then next thing I know, like I could come up with one idea for one character. I could do like 6 characters I like, but if like the 7th one is the one that just clicks with me above those other 6, then those other 6 will get moved, and that 7th one will go to the top. And then I start looking at the story from that person's point of view. And sometimes it's kids, sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's a woman. Sometimes it's a dog, and it just, I guess that's really like the process of how I come up with any of the characters, whether they're compelling or not. But luckily, I have a lot of fun with them.
Yeah. There's another author that I spoke to. I can't remember the name right now. But he said that he sends himself emails and then replies to those emails when he has an idea. So you saying that you kind of like have a discussion with yourself on a notepad is more or less the same thing. But it's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess so. Like when I was a teenager, I used to do it in like a composition notebook, and I would carry around that notebook with me everywhere. And to this day, I still carry around a notebook with me wherever I go. And so I would like have like random ideas, and I'd sit down and just write out that idea, and then kind of write out my thoughts about it and like how I would do this, which way I think it should go. And sometimes I stick to that. And then other times it's like, I'll use that to start with. And even if I've already discussed it with myself, like where I would go to point B, sometimes in the process of writing it, point B recreates itself as I'm writing. Yeah. And then I'll go back, look at those notes and go, oh, that's what I originally intended to do. But well, now I'm doing this. And so I still have my notes, and I'll kind of make new notes and have a new discussion, and then go back and forth from there.
Yeah. Are you kind of a plotter or a pantser or a bit of both?
I guess a bit of both. I've tried to do stuff completely by my pants, and I know a lot of people who do it that way, prefer it that way, but it stresses me out sometimes, because sometimes I'll write myself into a corner and have no idea how I'm going to get out of it. And I'm like, well, that's where I could kind of had structured a fail safe, and but I didn't. So, but the last book that just came out called Old Scratch, I didn't plot that one at all. And it was like the only thing I did was, as far as my notes go, I wrote out, who was, the person that was going to be telling the story and why they wanted to see Old Scratch, and that was all I had. And I don't know, but that one just kept, I guess, calling out to me, and I sat down, started writing it, and it ended up being without any type of planning, really, other than just that general idea. I went completely by the pants on that one, and had no issues. It was just like, by the time I was ending a chapter, the idea for the next chapter was coming in my head, and I would literally end that chapter, start the next one, and then that would be where I would stop for the day. And then the next day I'd come back, try my best to finish that chapter, start the next one, and then so on. And it's probably one of the quickest turnaround times I've had on a book in a while. I think I wrote the whole thing in about 5 weeks. It was crazy.
Yeah. Do you think that's because you more or less had the idea in your head that you didn't have to pants it as much? Plot it as much?
Probably. I mean, that might have helped with this one a lot. I don't know if I could have done that with, like any other ones, because this one was more of a, they get on the road and you never know what's going to get in their, what they're going to come across trying to get to their destination. And I like stories like that where it's like the main plot is, say, like this person's trying to get to this old graveyard, but then there's like all these obstacles along the way that they have to get through just to get to that point. And Richard Lehman does that a lot, and Jack Ketchum does that a lot. Stephen King does that a lot. And I like stuff like that. So I was like, well, I know where they need to be, but I don't know how they're going to get there. So that's literally, I just sat down, and that was how I wrote it. And it was so much fun.
Great. So your stories and your characters, are they actually based on events that you've experienced yourself or fears that you've got?
Um, there might be like a character here and there that could be based on something like that. Other stuff, you know, I guess things that fear me can also go into it. The weird thing is, I know some people kind of really enjoy writing about what scares them the most because, you know, it really pulls some great stories out of them. Me, it kind of makes me want to hide from the story, if that makes sense. But then at the same time, it also kind of, I can approach it in a almost like an honest, from an honest perspective, in writing it, because it's something that I would never in a million years ever would want to experience or, you know?
Yeah.
And so they can put me in a mindset where I'm like, okay, well, let's say you are the one strapped to this chair and this person's doing this to you. You know, then I'll start thinking about that. I'm like, gosh, that would just be awful. It's able for me to write like honest reactions, you know, in something like that. But like here and there'll be like a real event that will inspire or trigger like an idea. Like there was this whole years back with my oldest son. He was very hyperactive, you know, and a lot of people like teachers and everything. This is when he was really, really young. Thought, you know, it might be a good idea to put him on some type of medicine. And I didn't really agree with that. And I was just like, no, he's just kind of acting like a kid, you know, he's just being a kid. He's being a kid. And so we kind of went back and forth with that for a while. And the idea that came from it was like, what if there's this, these people who generally have like a legitimate monster child, like he's actual monster, flesh and blood monster, scales and hairy patches, and he's like really starting to act up, and you know they're trying to keep him hidden from society, but he keeps sneaking out and attacking things, and that little bit of that small situation with my son created this whole book about another kid who's just like a legitimate monster. So stuff like that can sort of trigger ideas here and there.
Have you ever found a particular story that you've written or seen that's been extremely difficult for you to write?
Yeah. I have a book called Desolation. It was very hard to write. And when I finished it and turned it in, I didn't have to look back on it at all until the edits came in, like almost a year later. And it's about, you know, people who, this one character is driving a car with his young son in the back and his pregnant wife in the passenger seat. And he's hit by a drunk driver. And everyone in that car dies but the guy. But the guy who hit him is also, you know, he has his own family. And he starts going through his own issues, you know, to where his family realize how much of an alcoholic he is. And, you know, so his family kind of splits apart, and he's like fighting to try and get his family back together and also kick, you know, being an alcoholic and everything. And the book picks up, you know, with them going to spend Christmas together in a cabin to try and just make things work one more time. And, at the same time, the guy who was in the other car, who lost his family, has gone completely obsessed with him, and his rage has driven him pretty much insane. And he shows up at the cabin as well. And so it's kind of like, you know, he shows up at the cabin, takes it over, does like a home invasion, and starts inflicting his type of revenge on that guy through that guy's family. And so it's like you have all these innocent people legitimately who have nothing to do with the two guys, why they hate each other, but they've all are the ones who are suffering for it. And that was a tough one to write, because it was like dealing with families and loss, and you know, a lot of serious darkness that people, like this one character, repressed for so long that it just literally explodes out of him and turns this normal, nice guy who's a English school teacher, into a freaking sadistic killer. And he goes after that guy and his family on Christmas.
Oh, that's a lovely time to go after someone, isn't it? Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Bring the Christmas cheer.
The Christmas fear.
So, what do you think's the hardest thing to write in horror?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I guess for me personally, probably just trying to be scary without almost sounding like you're glorifying things, There's a big difference between something being part of the story or just putting something in there because you're trying to, get a reaction out of people. To me, that's really hard because, anyone who doesn't normally read this type of stuff will have that sort of reaction no matter what it is and will almost accuse you of doing it intentionally,
Yeah.
But as writers, a lot of times we don't even intend to go any direction that we end up going. But the hardest thing to write, that's a good question. I don't know. I guess all of it can be pretty hard at times. But maybe it changes from different book to different story. Maybe sometimes it can even be like, does this even matter? What I'm writing, is anyone going to read it? That can be hard to convince yourself that you're writing something that somebody would want to read,
Yeah, I think authors are the worst. I mean, I've said it a few times. Authors are the worst critics of themselves.
Yes. And you're a writer too, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, always criticizing everything, even when they come back, and you still feel like it's not 100%.
Yeah, and the one thing I always tell everybody to do is don't read your reviews. Because then when you go to write the next one, the review of that last one will be in your head, and then it'll become hard to, enjoy yourself while you're trying to write the next one. So
have you had any reviews?
Critical ones, is that what you said?
Any memorable ones? Any that have actually stuck with you, good or bad?
There's one that always cracks me up. And I guess overall it's a pretty good review, but it's about that book I was talking about earlier, Bigfoot Beach. And all it said was, no Bigfoot sex, 4 stars. And that was the whole review. And to me, that was the best review, the most hilarious review I've ever gotten. And one that was very negative also made me laugh years back. It was for one of my Lurkers books. And, that might have been the second one. I don't think it was the first one. I think it was the second one. And my editor at the time, he sent it to me and he was like, he goes, well, Chris, you need to work on this. And what it was about a conversation 2 of the characters had in there. And they were given the whole book 1 star because the conversation they were having was unrealistic for the type of people they were. And I was like, well, the whole book's technically unrealistic because it's about tiny creatures and, coming out of the cornfields and killing people. But that one conversation is where how unrealistic that is. That's where that person drew the line, I guess.
That's the problem, though, isn't it? You get reviewers that you can actually draw from, sort of like criticism from, constructive criticism, I should say. And then you get the ones that mean absolutely nothing. Unbelievable. So have you got any exciting projects that you're currently working on?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's been announced, so I can talk about it. I just wrapped up my parts of there's this movie that came out in the 80s called Redneck Zombies. And it's a movie that I absolutely loved since I was a teenager. And I got to work with the screenwriter on doing the novelization for Encyclopocalypse Publications. And I just today, as a matter of fact, finished my part of everything. And the first draft. So when the screenwriter Ed finishes his part, we'll have a whole book, and we'll just read over it and make sure everything looks okay, and then send it over to Encyclopocalypse. So it looks like that'll probably be coming out in the next couple months. I just had a book release back at the very end of October called Old Scratch, and that one was a lot of fun. I have a short story coming out in, let's see, Dark Disasters, which is being put out by Uncomfortably Dark, where the theme was like horror that takes place during natural disasters. And I chose hurricane. So I have my stories about this family trapped in their house with a killer while hurricanes hammering everything outside. And I also have a short story coming out in the new Splatterpunk book, The Basement of Horror, which is they're doing for fundraising, and there was a bunch of us that got together and provided stories for that.
Yeah.
And then also I have a short story coming out in Christmas themed collection that hasn't been announced yet, but as soon as it's announced, I'll be able to shout it from the rooftops. But they should be announcing that any day now. But it comes out next month, and it's a Christmas themed anthology, and I have a story in that as well.
That's brilliant. All sounds very exciting, and doesn't sound like you're doing a lot at all. Not at all.
Oh, I love it. A couple years ago, I sort of took a break. I became a single dad, and I had 3 kids, so it was kind of like, my writing time went from boom, like writing in the morning, writing in the evening, to just like everyone's asleep. I'm half dead to the world. I'm going to try and write 1 to 2 sentences, And then about 2 years ago, I kind of kicked back into it really hard. My kids are older now, and, so I can kind of work with their schedules a little bit easier now. So I'm writing a whole lot more.
That's the trouble with having kids, isn't it? They take up too much time.
And I have 3, expanding the whole age spectrum. So it's like I have an older child who's, actually I now have 2 children that have graduated high school, but then I have a young one who's still in elementary school. So I'll be going through all that again with him. And I might, be able to retire when I'm like, I don't know, maybe 75 and really pump out some stories then.
It doesn't get any better when they get older either. Not at all. Okay, so it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. So thank you very much, Kristopher, for joining us.
Well, I thank you for having me. I appreciated the invite.
You're very welcome.